I'm Johnny Go. I'm a Jesuit priest and educator working in the Philippines, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our course called Learning by Refraction. The course is about Ignatian Pedagogy in the 21st century. The idea here is that we shouldn't look at Ignatian Pedagogy only as something that was concocted in the past, but something that may continue to be relevant today and especially in the future as we pursue our mission as Ignatian educators. If you have some experience in the IPP, this diagram would look very familiar to you because this diagram sort of summarizes the five elements of Ignatian pedagogy, namely context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. We're going to spend some time later on to discuss each of these elements because it's important to sort of clear the ground, to sort of try to make sure that we have some shared understanding of what these elements mean. The reason is that in the past 25 years of the implementation of the IPP, obviously practitioners have implemented the IPP in different ways and have emerged with different understandings. So for us to have a meaningful discussion, even if we want to disagree with one another, that will be possible only if we have a shared understanding of what these elements of the IPP mean. So we will spend some time talking about these elements. In this slide, you will find four words or phrases that are commonly heard or encountered in Jesuit education. And I think they capture very well the mission of all Jesuit schools and universities. We have Magis, the passion for excellence. We have Cura Personalis, personal care for every single student. We have Persons for Others, the service orientedness of our students that we're aiming for. And finally, we have Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, AMDG, which is the goal and end of Jesuit education. If I had to summarize Jesuit education, this would be one way for me to summarize it. I would use this inverted triangle and talk about three components of Jesuit education. First, there's academic excellence, but as we know, Jesuit education isn't just about academic excellence. It's a holistic education, therefore it has to do with the formation of the person. And in Jesuit schools and universities, we would refer to this formation as Ignatian formation, which includes faith formation, as well as values and character formation. But academic excellence and Ignatian formation are not enough. They are but means to another end. And that end, I think, is service outreach. We want our students precisely to be persons for others. We want them to be able to serve society, especially those who are in greatest need for the greater glory of God. So I think this slide captures for us what is essential in Jesuit education: academic excellence, Ignatian formation, and service outreach. The reason I spent some time talking about Jesuit education is that Ignatian pedagogy will have to be contextualized. We have to be able to see how Ignatian pedagogy helps promote the mission of Jesuit education. So in that sense, we can say that the IPP is a means, a very important means to fulfilling the mission of Jesuit schools and universities. The way we're going to proceed in this course is that I will be sharing with you some ideas, some theories, some concepts, some of them new perhaps. Others perhaps are already quite familiar to you. But I will be presenting them to you as conversation pieces. In other words, the intention is to provoke talk as well as thought. So I'm hoping that the conversation pieces will stimulate you into thinking about them, into reflecting about them, and sharing your ideas, even your disagreements, no? With one another as well as with myself. I think this way of proceeding is very effective to promote learning. So I hope we will engage in conversation and learn from one another. While I'm sharing my ideas with you, while I'm delivering a lecture, while I'm offering you some input, I'm hoping also that you will do your part. And basically, you will have two tasks. The first task is to connect to your context, and the second task is to reflect on your experience. One of the key insights of Ignatian pedagogy is that unless the learner is able to connect the new ideas, concepts, theories introduced in class to their own context, unless the learners reflect on their experiences, then there will be no meaning, and therefore there will be no learning. Now, we have a problem. The problem is that today, the prevailing online culture is anti-reflection. The online culture, the technology, social media, and so on and so forth, all of these do not encourage reflection. Our default is that we don't reflect. In his book, The Shallows, author Nicholas Carr offers us a contrast between being a cultivator of personal knowledge, which is really what happens when we are in the habit of reflecting on information that we receive, versus being a mere hunter in the digital forest, which is what happens in this copy and paste culture. We tend to go after information, we tend to hoard on information, and we end up not reflecting. We end up skimming through the things that we're reading on the screen. Studies have shown that if you're reading from a screen, from a tablet, or from your phone, you tend to skim. You tend to engage in superficial reading. So there is no space for reflection. So I think one challenge for us as we're going through this course is we need to walk the talk. We need to try to engage in reflection, which is one of the key features of Ignatian pedagogy. So here once again we have a snapshot of Ignatian pedagogy with its 5 defining elements: context, experience, reflection, action, and evaluation. But for us to be able to appreciate this, I think it's important for us to go back to its origin. Where did it all begin? So let's do a little bit of history of Jesuit education. How did the Jesuits get into education? So I think one big idea that I'd like to emphasize at the outset is that the heart of Jesuit education is Ignatian spirituality. And Ignatian spirituality is the fruit of Ignatius of Loyola's search all his life. The insights that are found in Ignatian spirituality, the way of proceeding, the way of finding God in all things, all of these resulted from the search that Ignatius of Loyola engaged in his life. Let's examine this image. As the caption suggests, this is St. Ignatius going back to school at the age of 33. And here you can see that he was surrounded by much younger classmates. He made this decision when he realized that if he wanted to serve God, it was important for him to get a good education. And true enough, after this, he went to several other schools and universities until finally he ended up in the University of Paris, where he got his master's degree. And it was here that he met St. Francis Xavier and the other first companions. Of course, when the first companions gathered around St. Ignatius, they did not really intend to begin a religious order, but as always, because of the events that transpired, because of their experiences, they got together and they discerned and decided this was something that they were being called to do, to begin a different kind of religious order. A religious order that was finally approved by Pope Paul III in the 27th of September in 1540. What this graph illustrates for us is the rapid increase of the number of members in the Society of Jesus. So in 1540, there were only 7 Jesuits, but by the year 1615, there were already 13,000 Jesuits. What this graph shows us is the rapid increase in the number of Jesuit schools. We find here a rather intriguing quote from John O'Malley, the author of the book The First Jesuits, where he wrote, "The Jesuits got into education almost by the back door." Now that's a very interesting quote. What does he mean by that? Well, what O'Malley means is that the farthest thing from the mind of Ignatius and the first Jesuits was to set up schools, because they did not want to get stuck in one place. They wanted to be available for whatever mission they were needed for. And yet, by the year 1548, they opened a school in Messina, followed by another school in Palermo in 1549, followed by another school in Rome in 1551. And if you look at the graph, you will see the rapid rise of the number of Jesuit schools during that time. Contrary to their initial intention, the Jesuits ended up in the work of formal education, and in a rather big way. So much so that by the 17th century, the philosopher Francis Bacon said that for education, we should consult the schools of the Jesuits. By that time, the Jesuits were considered the schoolmasters of Europe. So you may ask, so what happened? Whatever happened to their initial intention of keeping away from schools, of keeping away from formal education? Well, the answer is they engaged in discernment. In the course of their discernment, they recognized the greater need as well as the greater good. And we will see that they have begun to engage in reflecting on their experience, both in prayer and in conversations with one another. And their reflection, the fruits of their prayer, inform their decision and their action into going into schools. Now, earlier I said that the thrust of our course is to really look at the future, how Ignatian pedagogy remains relevant today, and how it can continue to be relevant in the future. Now, for this reason, our textbook for the course is Learning by Refraction, as you already know. It's a book that I co-authored with Rita Atienza, and the idea here was to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the publication of the seminal document, Ignatian Pedagogy, A Practical Approach, which came out in the 80s. But secondly, it's also a way of updating Ignatian pedagogy, making use of all the latest insights about education, and sort of testing whether Ignatian pedagogy is compatible with them. The book was designed by practitioners, for practitioners primarily, but they're also based on research and consultation. We were able to talk to Ignatian educators not only in Asia Pacific, but also in North America, in Europe, just to exchange notes, just to find out what have been some of the challenges as well as some of the best practices. And so what we try to do is we sort of collated all of this. We tried to bring them together so we can share them with Ignatian educators. Now, here's a very important quote that captures the spirit of what went into the book. According to the former Secretary of Education, Father Codina, the first Jesuits went, as it were, to the supermarket of education to find the best ingredients and recipes for an educational approach consistent with their spiritual experience. Now, what I'd like to highlight here is that the Jesuits did not decide that they were going to come up with something absolutely original. What they did was they looked around and shopped around for what would be compatible with their vision of Jesuit education, with what was emerging as the vision for Jesuit education. And Codina continues, even more they were aware that a truly good education requires continuous renewal, innovation, reinterpretation, and reinvention. And that if they wanted to actually provide quality education, they have to be attentive to the always changing context and open to new developments. Now, this was the spirit in which the book, Learning by Refraction, was written. The idea was we have this tradition of Ignatian pedagogy. We have a wealth of experiences from practitioners, and we have the wisdom of practice accumulated through the years. So now it's time maybe to take stock, bring all these things together, all these experiences and insights, and figure out how we can innovate Ignatian pedagogy, how we can reinterpret and reinvent Ignatian pedagogy to make it even more effective. There is nothing absolutely prescriptive about learning by refraction. The spirit that I'd like you to assume as you're listening to the ideas from this approach and interpretation of Ignatian pedagogy is what St. Ignatius calls tantum quantum, which is found in his first principle and foundation in the spiritual exercises. Tantum quantum literally means in as much as and in so far as. If you recall, in the first principle and foundation, St. Ignatius talks about how we are creatures of God and we must not be attached to things, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, but we should choose the things in as much as or in so far as they serve the greater glory of God. So in the same spirit, I'd like to invite you to use and own whatever is useful and helpful, whatever you find useful and helpful in this course and in the textbook, but also feel free to ignore and toss out whatever you may consider useless or not helpful. Now, the book is called Learning by Refraction. So some of you may be wondering, why did we use the term refraction? And there's really a story behind that. No? So if you look at the dictionary meaning of refraction, you'll find two meanings of refraction in the dictionary. No? The first is the bending and change of light, radio waves, etc., as it passes through a different medium. And secondly, it refers to the measurement of the focusing characteristics of an eye or eyes. So when we say refract, we're talking about the bending of light waves, but we're also talking about what our eye doctors do when we visit them, no? When they're trying to figure out what kind of prescription glasses we should be wearing. No? So refraction isn't about reflection. No? Reflection is about giving back everything 100%. No? Refraction isn't reflection. Although the activity reflection is important in learning, the scientific sense of reflection does not quite capture what should happen in learning. Learning is not about reflecting everything back 100%. It's about the learner changing the content. So just as the medium changes the light by bending its waves, we expect our learners not only to accept whatever the teacher says or whatever they read from books or whatever they hear from experts. We expect them to change the content and make the content their own. Only then does learning happen. With regard to the second meaning of refraction, we feel that refraction captures the trial and error process that the eye doctor goes through when he or she is trying to prescribe spectacles for us. So the feedback that the eye doctor gets from the patient will help the eye doctor adjust the lenses so that they end up with the right one. In the same way, learning goes through a trial and error process. The feedback from the teacher hopefully will lead to the students self-adjusting until the students get it right, quote unquote. That is one effective way for learning to happen. But another reason why we opted for the term refraction is that the two defining ingredients of Ignatian pedagogy, among its 5 elements, are reflection and action. And if you say reflection and action fast enough, you actually end up saying something that sounds like refraction. Okay, I know it's not a very profound reason, but we thought it would be a good thing to mention. No? So basically, learning by refraction is a new framework for Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. But basically, it focuses on two things: how to promote reflection and how to promote action. Because these two are the defining features of Ignatian pedagogy. As we said earlier, learning by refraction is not a prescription. It is one particular interpretation and approach, and I hope if you find it helpful, in the spirit of tantum quantum, you will still beg or borrow whatever you find helpful, but ignore whatever you don't. So here are 3 big ideas about Ignatian pedagogy that we'd like to propose to you in this course. The first is Ignatian pedagogy can help strengthen our identity and deepen our culture as Jesuit institutions. So we're building a case here that the IPP is a very crucial tool in strengthening the identity of our Jesuit schools and universities. And this is particularly crucial today because of the diminishing presence of Jesuits in our institutions. The second big idea is that Ignatian pedagogy actually enables us to promote 21st century learning in a systematic way. There are so many trends today, so many insights in education, no? Things that can promote learning, things that can make teaching more effective. No? And sometimes it's tempting for teachers to just latch on to one particular framework or another, What we're proposing here, what we're arguing here, is that the IPP actually provides a systematic way for us to pick and choose which of these we can use to promote learning better in our classroom. And finally, of course, Ignatian pedagogy can also help us better educate our post-millennial students. So Ignatian pedagogy can help us better respond to the needs of our post-millennial students. I'd like to end with a reflection activity. I'd like you to look at this diagram. And this diagram sort of tries to capture the different ways in which Ignatian pedagogy is practiced in different schools and universities. So I'd like you to connect to your context and to reflect on your experience as a faculty member of your school or your university. So there are two ways in which we can analyze the way Ignatian pedagogy is practiced in our Jesuit schools and universities. The first is asking ourselves, is Ignatian pedagogy evident in the way we design our classes, our academic programs, and formation programs? Can we tell if Ignatian pedagogy is alive and well when we enter a classroom and see how our programs are being run? Or going to the other end, to the right side, is it more palpable in our school culture? Perhaps it is not so evident in our classes and programs, but we can sort of feel its presence in our school culture. So that's the first question. The second question is Ignatian's pedagogy practiced more spontaneously or more by design? So in this diagram, you have four quadrants, and each quadrant has a color. White would refer to a spontaneous practice of Ignatian pedagogy as evident in the classes and programs. Yellow would be a spontaneous practice of Ignatian pedagogy, more evident in our school culture. Green would be a more deliberate practice of Ignatian pedagogy, as evident in our classes and programs. And blue would represent a more deliberate implementation of Ignatian pedagogy, as evident in our school culture. Now, there's a fifth color, red, which is all of the above. No? You cannot choose red. I'd like you to just think about your school, how Ignatian pedagogy is being implemented or how it has been practiced there, and ask yourself which of the four colors, white, yellow, green, or blue, would best describe IPP in your schools.